Okay, I think we're good now. Here we go. All right, sorry, just 1 second. Okay, well, I have made a slight mistake in that I have been going for 15 minutes. I clicked stream on my software and record, but it turns out I also have to go and double click it on the YouTube page. So I'm very sorry if you were anxiously waiting by your computer and hoping that you would see my lovely face and you were let down. I apologize. So here we are at last. It's funny because I was already halfway through the video, so now we're starting over, but that's okay. So welcome to Learn Lettering Live. We're learning as we go. It's live. I guess there's no takebacks, and so we're just doing the best we can. This is my second episode. I'm really glad that you've joined me. So the purpose of this live stream is one of the things that I specialize in is custom lettering, hand lettering, and typography. And as I've thought about it, and like that's something that I feel like I can really contribute when it comes to education and learning graphic design. And the thing that I have seen about it is that it's just really complex. There's a lot of nuance to it and a lot to learn. And definitely I could do like a however many video course, but I realized probably the best way to learn is just to sit over my shoulder and watch and have me be able to explain as I go. Because a lot of times it's a lot of small things. And so it's hard to think how to make a video about this. Hi, so glad you're in the chat. I'm really glad that you're here. Welcome. But anyway, so it's hard for me to explain all of these things in like small little chunks. It's better just to give it to you in a live video like this, and you can take with it what you will. So that's the point of these videos. That's why we're doing live, is because it is a more helpful way, I think, for you to learn lettering. So today, before we get started, I want to offer a little bit of an encouragement. So I personally just can get really off when it comes to numbers. I don't know if you guys feel the same way. I think in our society, most of us do. But for example, for the live stream, it's like it's a success if a lot of people tune in. It's a failure if a lot of people don't. And I've realized that there's no number that's good enough. Like you'll always want more. It's like this insatiable hunger. I don't think it's great. It's not a good attitude and not a good way to think. And so this morning I was thinking, and I kind of had this thought pop into my head, and it was just that if one person is encouraged today, then I've done my job. That's what I want to do. And there's no end to the graphic design videos you can find online. I don't think that the world really needs another graphic design channel, but I do think the world needs more encouragement. And so my encouragement to you is that if you relate to me and it's easy for you to get caught up in all of the numbers and like all that stuff, maybe our goal can just be, let's just see if we can encourage someone today. If we can have an interaction with somebody and leave them better than how we found them, then maybe that's really all that we need. And if that's enough, then I think the world will just kind of be a better place. So anyway, now for the second/first time, let's get into the video. Welcome to Learn Lettering Live. All right. Sorry if you're hearing me cough. I've been talking for 15 minutes and just realized none of you could see it. So welcome to my iPad. We're in Procreate. Just one sec. We're in Procreate. And so if you're not on an iPad, you don't have to be. You could be doing this on your piece of paper, a sketch pad, but I'm going to use the iPad because it's easy to show you digitally, and there's just a lot of great features with working digitally. This little thing, this little magic hand glove I'm wearing is to help me with my pen, so it keeps my hand from kind of getting stuck on the screen, helps me create more smooth curves. It's not mandatory, but I figured in case you're wondering what that is. But today we're going to be picking up where we left off last week. We were working on these shapes, or these letter forms, kind of like this, like these drop caps that you would see in a children's book or an old book, where they have these beautiful letters that start off a chapter. So I thought this would be a good place to start, because last week we talked about serifs and sans serifs. If you haven't seen that video, you can check back in the archives. But we talked about the different types of letter forms, and I started by just drawing this R. So you maybe have already been drawing as well, and have a different one, or maybe you're just watching or whatever. But today we're going to be doing is we're going to be going in and adding all of these types of flourishes. And so this is not exclusively drawing letters, but one thing that I have learned a lot is that you can have really nice letters, but what really helps them come to life is the elements that you add to enhance them. And so whether that's illustration, using texture, color, it could be using little accents like these flourishes. whatever it is, that is going to help enhance your design. And so in the vein of learning lettering, this goes into it really well. So there's a lot of do's and don'ts when it comes to this kind of stuff, and I'm going to show you an example, because what we always got to do is think back to how this started and what is our frame for what looks right and doesn't look right. So for example, with serif letter forms, like I showed you in the last video, we have this overall shape of the letter forms, and then your vertical lines are thicker, your horizontal lines are thinner, and then the verticals are thick. And so the reason we draw letters like that is because of old Latin ruins and things where they had inscribed and chiseled into stone these different letter forms, and this is roughly how they did it. And so we have inferred a lot from that. And so my point is, if you're trying to add flourishes, you can definitely try to just do it on your own and make it up as you go. But ultimately, there's something in our brain that's going to recognize like that doesn't look right because we're used to what's been established. So like I always say, you got to learn the rules so you can break them. So we're going to start with the rules and start with what kind of the normal is. So in Pinterest, I found this example of some flourishes. And what you'll notice about these and about flourishes that work well, there's some others down here, is that they have this idea of implied motion. There's movement happening, and you want to make sure that whenever you're working, you don't compromise the movement. You always want to make sure that your movement is continuing the same direction and you don't do anything that starts to feel awkward. And I'm going to show you a little bit of what I mean when I say things that feel awkward. So I'm just going to draw some examples over here. All right, so these are some simple do's and don'ts before we get started. So let's say I have a swirl like this. Okay, this looks pretty good. So I'll do another one as well for my example. Okay, so what I find in this type of flourish is helpful is that you want to make sure that you feel like you have these lines that are continuing throughout the flourish. So what I mean is that this feels like it's one line. Like there's a consistency. The spot where this flourish meets this curve feels really smooth. Like an example of what wouldn't feel smooth would be something like this. Or like, you see how that looks wrong? Like this is inspired from nature, and at least in these kind of vines where this is inspired from, things aren't just going to jut out at odd angles. They grow naturally and they grow from a source. And so we want to make sure we're not doing stuff like this because immediately your eye can tell that this doesn't look right. And so that's the kind of thing we're trying to avoid. Also, when I'm talking about motion, so if we get a general idea, this is kind of the motion of our swirls, right? They're continuing a motion starting from this point and going out is kind of where we're going. And so what we don't want to do is this. Let's see. Okay, I'm following my curve, like this feels smooth, but the problem is now I've changed my direction to where now we're going in the opposite way. So these two are in opposition, and that starts to look weird. So we don't want to change direction. And then the third thing I'm going to show you, this one's really important. So let's imagine that we have like a bunch of cups, right? And you can either have, let's make it like a little coffee cup. So you can either have the coffee cup that is face up, but you could pour stuff in it, or the coffee cup is turned upside down, and you can't put anything in it. So it's like concave and convex if you're familiar with the math way of looking at curves. But anyway, so if we have our coffee cups, we can alternate in a curve, in a single curve. So like say this is underneath, right? Like that's upside down cup, and then this is right side up cup. Okay. So what I want to avoid doing is I want us, here I'm going to erase these guys. I want us to avoid changing the direction more than once. So for example, come out from here, let's see, this. All right, hold on. Let's see, maybe better from here. Okay, so this doesn't look right, and I'm going to show you why. So we have right down here, we have our bowl, and then we have upside down bowl, and then we got bowl again. So this is happening 3 times, and I say don't change it more than once, or more than twice, I guess. So what would be better is instead of doing this, no, I actually do say don't change it more than twice. So really the best goal I would do, so if I go back and undo this, is that this right here Okay, there's my one change because we were going from a bowl right there, and now we're from upside down bowl. I really need a better way of saying this, but that's okay. So now my change has happened once right here, and then twice right here. So with each curve, same thing. 1, 2, 1, 2. Even here, 1. Well, no, that's not as big a deal, but when you're making new curves is what I'm talking about. So that's what you want to avoid is whenever you are trying to make new curves that you don't want to, oh no, I lost my color. You don't want to do things like this because that does not look right. Like you're starting to feel awkward. It looks like waves and that's not what we're going for. So that's a few important things when it comes to flourishes is that we're always moving from this point. We're keeping a consistent direction and we're not looping back and we're not flipping from cup to upside down cup too often. Really only once, maybe twice if you're going to be real dangerous about it. But in general, those are the rules that we stick by. Okay, so now that we've had a little Flourishes 101, I'm going to pull up, this is what I already had started on. So I'm just gonna start from here so we're not doing it all over again, but I'll just kind of walk you through what I decided to do. So I like the idea of my flourishes all coming from one spot or maybe two spots. That way they're not just randomly appearing. If it does mirror the idea of a vine, then they're growing from somewhere. If I just come in, I'm just doing a circle here and a circle here and something here, like that kind of feels silly, I think. And so I want it to make sense. So I'm having it grow out from our border. You can see it's growing from the top and the bottom. And what I've chosen to do is I've chosen to make this curve here. I'll use my green so it's easier to see. That's not my green, that's my green. Okay, so I've chosen to make this curve kind of mirror this curve of the R. So this feels similar. And same thing up here, this curve in the R is mirroring this curve for our flourish. So we have this symmetry happening. And what's important here is we're wanting to make sure that our swirls and our letter forms play nicely together. They should feel like one cohesive piece. And so one other thing I want to make note of, which is really important, is that we don't want to compromise, how's the best way to say this? We want to make sure that we have consistency in the size and spacing of our swirls. And so, for example, if we're looking at the space here, it's roughly the same as the space up here, like in this negative space. Remember how we talked about this contour right here? This is the inside of our R, and then we also have this spot right here, and then this spot right here. So that creates this negative space in our R. And what we want to do in letter forms is we want to pay attention to the negative space because that's where your eye is going to pick up on mistakes. And so I'll undo this, but the same thing is true for our flourishes, is that I want to keep a general level of consistency with all of my spacing. And I don't want to, you can change things up a bit, but I don't want to change it so much to where things start to feel like they don't belong. And let me show you what I mean. So for example, I don't want to have, let's say we have one more swirl up here. It's really nice, kind of touching the edges. And I see I'm keeping a consistency and like rough consistency in the space between my swirls. What I don't want to do is this. So you can tell that looks wrong. It looks wrong because of its placement, but even right here, that starts to feel awkward. Why? It's because I have too tight of spacing. Like this doesn't at all match the kind of height that I have over here. And so I want to make sure that I'm keeping that consistent. So with that in mind, planning out these swirls to make them look right is very important. So those are most of my rules, I think. There's a lot that goes into this, and basically we just want to make sure that everything is feeling cohesive and feels natural. Another thing I'm going to make note of is I'm going to try to give roughly the same amount of swirls coming from the bottom as I am from the top. I want them to feel balanced. These are not absolutes. Like I said, you really can break the rules. And some of these are not rules. They're just my preference. But in general, that's what we're going to do. All right. So I think I've kind of hit the things that I had already hit whenever I had not started this video but thought I had. But yeah, I'm just going to kind of work a bit and see what we can do. Also, another thing is like, even if I'm thinking if I split this whole thing in half, that could be a good way to look at my swirls. Like I don't really need, it's not a problem here, but it would be kind of funny if this guy was like coming all the way over here because now I'm moving way like too far away from its source. So because I've got two, I'm going to kind of try to keep them close to their source. All right, so I'm just going to play around here and see what we get. Another thing I didn't mention is that there are also these options where you can kind of, this is the one thing where I'd say you are allowed to break that rule about the direction, is that if you have kind of a little point where it ends and then it starts back up again, that could also be a swirl if you wanted to. You could curve it there, but I like to make them a little more sharp. That to me is acceptable when you look at examples that people have used over time. But I don't like to use it too often. Like I wouldn't want to do it again because, or maybe I could, but you don't want it to feel like you're in like a really strict pattern. And I'm also thinking too about how eventually what I'll do is I'll make some of these kind of interact with my R shape here, thinking about how it can loop in and out of the letter form itself. So all that to say, we're keeping all these things in mind as we work on our different swirls. You also notice sometimes when things start to feel a little awkward like that, because it feels like we just have these big, it's like almost like a 3-leaf clover or something. You don't want to get stuck in like basically the same size. Like you still want to mix up your size of your swirls, of your flourishes, to give some variety, and then mix up their origin too. Like we can't have 100 coming from this spot. So now what I'm going to do is I'll take my area over here, and then I can create something new. Okay. I don't think I like this one actually. And a lot of this is just like how we were doing with the letter form. You're working additively and reductively. You're adding and removing because you're going to change your mind and decide to do something different. And it's all part of the process. Another good thing I like to do is just have like maybe a little half swirl. And those can be really fun whenever we're adding in more detail because our flourishes will not just be simple lines. We'll make them a little more interesting. But I already have one down here. We're going to add a few of those, and those create a lot of visual interest whenever you're adding more detail to the swirls. So my goal is trying to figure out how I can get my swirls to fill up this space without them feeling awkward. So I'm going to kind of play around with that and see what I can get. What I'm not going to do is do something weird like that. And because I have only a small amount of space to work with down here, I don't really know what my plan will be. But in the end of the world, maybe it just has like, I could also do some kind of a little accent or something in the corner. I don't know. We're not really limited by every rule, just some of them. So we'll get to that. Let's see. I'm tracing my movement again. Remember, I'm watching where this is going to make sure I know how to follow that. Come on. There we go. That's pretty good. It does seem like I have a little bit of empty space here, but whenever I actually create my swirls, I can maybe make that part more thick whenever I'm bringing in the detail. So I might be able to resolve that issue. So I'm not going to worry about that right now. Okay, top side's looking good. Let's see. So because I've done this here where it cuts, like where it kind of starts over, I don't really want to do that again if I can avoid it. That kind of breaks our direction rule. That may be the best solution here. Okay. Let's see. This is interesting. My problem is this little corner, and so we got to figure out what we're going to do here. The thing is, it definitely feels like this section has a lot more happening as far as swirls. Like this has twice as many, which isn't really the end of the world, but I may retract this one that I just did and see if I can instead use this bottom branch. Makes it a little more interesting. Yeah, and that could resolve my other issue. I don't know that's the best. Let's see. I'm going to try one more option before we commit to that. So that seems like that may be a bit more interesting for me. We're not married to any of these. We can always change them as we go. There's no problem with that. Yeah, so I'm just going to kind of add a few finishing touches. But honestly, I feel pretty happy with this. This space is feeling a little dead, just comparatively with everything else having a little more space. So let's see what we can do. Sometimes you have something coming from one area, and then you can have something coming from somewhere else can help to fill those issues. And again, I'm kind of coming into my scale issue where these guys feel really small in comparison to my other one. So I'm not sure I'm sold on that. And it starts to feel like there's a lot of junctions happening really close to each other. Okay, we'll try something else. Okay, what I could do in theory, oops, wrong one, is maybe just move this whole thing down and scale it up a bit and rotate it. This is why working digitally is so nice. Yeah, this could be interesting for sure. Yeah, I think that's going to do more for me. And from there, we can get a little curly flourish. Okay, I'd say we're close. We'll add one right here, or maybe again, I'm thinking about I don't want to overlap my R too much, or this is just going to get crazy. But we'll keep it at that for now. Okay, so I think this is pretty interesting. I feel like we've got a lot of good potential here. And so now is going to come the tricky part, which is actually adding all these in. So I'm going to bring my opacity down on this layer. So I just have it as a reference. What I also may do is I might just, instead of duplicating it, I'm going to add a mask, bring my opacity back up. And then in my mask, this lets me hide parts of my design that I don't want without actually deleting them. So at this point, I can try to figure out where things go under or over the R. In general, this is not hard and fast, but in general, you don't want to do the same thing twice. Like if it goes under here, you don't also want it to go under over here. You generally want them to flip-flop. But because these flourishes cut back on themselves a lot, I'm not honestly super worried about that. And then even I can pay attention to where the flourishes themselves overlap. So does this go under or does it go over? I would say probably over makes more sense. And I'm also just looking to make sure I don't have weird little stubs of a line that are left on their own, like right here. Like this little guy is kind of awkward. So that's also what I'm avoiding, is I want to make sure that I'm not leaving any pieces just totally stranded, which I guess you could argue that this guy is as well, but I think it looks a little better. And that may actually not be a big issue. It just depends on how we end up creating our flourishes. So, all right, I'm getting a little brain dizziness, tiredness, but we're gonna keep going. So we'll have this cut underneath. So this will all stay on top. I like the idea of let's see, I'll show you of this part being on top because I like how you'll have this whole part where it comes in and then it goes and then it kind of reverses its direction all on top of the R, which I think will be interesting and nice. And then later up here, we'll hide it behind this area. And then we'll have this whole swirl we can keep on top because that will kind of complete it. I think if it were to tuck back behind, that would start to feel a little funny, but maybe that could work. We'll leave it for now. Okay. So going back over here, we need to see what parts go under and what's go over. Because this one's going under here, it may be smart to also make this one go over, but maybe that's the same reason why we don't do it. This I wouldn't say I have hard and fast rules for, but someone probably does. So I'm going to leave it over for now. What would be nice... Okay, so this is where I'm going to make a little adjustment. And this is where it's really helpful to pay attention to how your flourishes and your letters interact. So for example, if I move this down just a bit, then now I could have it to where this junction here is going to happen right, it like kind of pops out of that space behind that piece of the R. I feel like I may not be explaining this well. So you have this piece of your R, right? And so the idea would be like in this space, it kind of like can pop out and go in this direction or that direction. I'm not able to draw this well here. Actually, sorry, I'm not in my mask anymore. I can draw it for you. Okay, so we have this shape here. And that's gonna, obviously be colored in. So it'd be cool if now our flourish right here where it exits behind that's where it separates. And we have this cool divide that pops out on top. So that may sound like nonsense to you, but you'll see what I mean, I promise. Okay, so what I'll do is I'll erase this guy here. I need to rework this line just a bit because now we can have it to where it breaks nicely at this point. So draw this guy and then that. Okay, that should do the trick. All right, now I'm gonna go back to my mask. And at this point, I might hide this. The one thing I want to avoid, this is very important, is I don't want to have too much of my R obscured. I want to make sure that you can still clearly read it for what it is. So the flourishes in this are going to be a bit more subtle than our example where they're pretty intense. I want them to be a little bit more subtle because I want to make sure that you can really appreciate the R for what it is. Also because we have this part that's coming on top, I'm going to want to hide this piece so they don't look too close to each other. Okay. And it's interesting because you also have this thing to where it almost seems like this could be the same shape, right? Which I'll probably adjust that because I don't want there to be confusion with that. Okay, now coming over here, let's see. I could hide this like here and have it just kind of poke out after the R, but I think I lose the top part of the shape starts to feel confusing, right? Like I start to lose that curve. So what I'll do instead is I'm going to hide right here. Yep, then this will all show, like this whole portion up here will keep visible. And then we'll probably let it, yeah, that sounds great. So then we'll put this underneath. So that's cutting underneath. Then it'll go on top. There's a lot of things happening on top here. So I might move this underneath as well so that the last pieces can appear on top of the R. Okay, I'm pretty close here. Then I need to make note of where my flourishes overlap with each other. Just like that. And then right here. Or maybe like this. Nope. The idea also, this is important as well, and one of those subtle things, is it feels like if we're starting here, then it's going to move this way. And then up here. And then we're moving back down this way. Because this portion would come later, like if it's being drawn in this order, it feels like this portion would be on top. Does that make sense? So there's also some subtle rules that I'm using when I'm thinking about what parts overlap what is because I'm thinking about what makes sense as far as the order of how that would actually happen naturally. Okay. Okay, you guys, I'd say we're looking pretty solid here. Okay, so we have a general idea, a general map, or I would call this a typographic stencil. I am going to change one thing, which is shrinking down this shape slightly, just so it doesn't feel like it's competing as much. There we go. And now we should be pretty close to ready to go. Sorry, I'm going to make a few more slight tweaks because these two feel kind of close. Okay, there we go. All right, here we are. I'm excited. I'm going to take a brief break, and then when I come back, we're going to actually take the flourishes and we're going to really flesh them out and draw them for real. So I'll take a little break and I'll see you in just a moment. All right, well, I'm back. And now we're going to make these flourishes look really good. So I will turn down my opacity on this layer where I can just barely see it. And then in my new layer, I'm going to choose the same color that I have for my R. I may make it slightly lighter so I still get the idea, but I can distinguish it. And now what I'm going to do is I've just been sticking with the same brush in Procreate, so I'll just keep with it. So in general, what I'm thinking is I could keep them all the exact same width, but like my serif, it's nice when it has contrast, when there are parts that are thick. You can't really see that very well. There are parts that are thick and there are parts that are thin. So I'm going to want to do something similar. I might actually make this kind of bright so we can just distinguish everything. Okay, well, I'm going to start from my base, and here's when this little thing comes in handy because I can draw these nice smooth lines, and it'll look pretty good. Already taking me a minute. Sometimes it's easier to draw in a certain direction, kind of to pull down than to push up, I find. Okay, so that's not perfect, but that's okay. That's why I can come back, erase a little, correct some of the curves. Yeah, like this looks a little awkward. And so does this. Because remember, what I'm working for has been a relatively rough sketch. So I'm going to have a lot of refining to do as I work because I wasn't thinking so much about the perfection of the swirls before. And it's okay if this is a little bit rough. Like I said, we add and remove a lot. And so what I'm really trying to do in this first run through is I'm trying to get my curves to look right, and I'm trying to make them look nice and smooth. All right, so we're close here. Okay, and it doesn't matter that it looks rough. We're going to come back and we're going to add in our thicks and our thins, and we'll be able to clean all that up. It's funny because before learning to work this way, the idea of having it not look perfect on the first go, just like so stressful for me. I'm pretty OCD or perfectionist or whatever whatever we decide to diagnose ourselves with. I guess we all kind of do. Okay, I'm gonna redraw that. And also, I like the idea of the swirls kind of kissing the edges of the border is nice. Okay. And we have made note of where we're going to do our overlaps, but for the sake of this, I'm just drawing everything out and focusing on the curves. And then I'm going to come back and I'll remove the parts that don't need to be there anymore. So this line's a little awkward. I don't really have to worry about this because it's going to be hidden. Just want to make sure it does look right. It'll go underneath. So we'll just leave that as is. Okay. So like I said, just lightly kissing the edges here. And we're going to curve in. And the one exception I would say about my bowl rule, like filling up halfway, is whenever you are coming from a new start right here, then it is natural to have it flip like that because it's like you're beginning a curve afresh. I don't know if you guys caught that or if that makes sense, but in case anyone was wondering. Honestly, I'd say this is looking pretty good so far. I feel pretty satisfied. It's the thing with these live videos is you just really don't know what your product is going to be. And like I said, being kind of a perfectionist, I want it to be perfect for you guys, but we're just going to enjoy the journey, you know. As my dad says. Okay. So we're looking pretty good. And I like getting this all in one fluid motion. If you can have a way to keep your hands steady, I find that's the best. But some of you may not, and that's okay. An important piece of this as well is the goal for me is that I should be able to take any section of the swirls and pull them out and they still work and look right. So that's one thing to think about is like as you're drawing a curve, if this curve was all on its own, would it still work? And that is usually a good grid. If everything is working together, all the pieces work on their own, then they should, in theory, work together. That's pretty rough. I definitely could be working with a more like fine brush that's a little more smooth, but I like the way that it gives me this texture around my letter. I think it's really interesting, and the same with will be with my strokes, to where it's not perfect, feels a little more hand drawn, which is appealing to me. Um, when I first is kind of an interesting. I haven't really thought about this, but when I first became a graphic designer, I was really intrigued because I had done art for a long time as a kid, and I got access to whenever I was in high school a version of the Creative Suite, the Adobe Creative Suite, and I remember it just blowing my mind because as someone who had been doing art for a long time and someone who has a tendency towards perfectionism, um, I was so blown away that in Illustrator I could draw a circle and it was actually a circle. Like it was 100% a perfect circle. that really blew my mind a lot, and I think is part of what really hooked me. But then I also realized that uh, part of the problem is as well is that everything is a little perfect, and so that's why I think that you see some designs, like especially adding texture to your work, goes a really long way because it sticks it out from something that feels so digital or even artificial. And I think in our culture, especially, people really respond to authenticity. And so that's part of why I think hand lettering has kind of exploded in like the art worlds, and people are so big on it. And it's part of what I did too, is because you like, okay, you can do these things on the computer. You can just type and have a font that spits out that looks pretty nice. But what if you do something all from your own brain? Like it all comes from you. It feels really authentic. It feels really fresh. And I think that people are really drawn to that. And so it's just interesting that the reason I got into graphic design, or the reason it initially intrigued me so much, was because I could get things perfect. But now I intentionally pursue imperfection, which I guess that goes back to the whole learn the rules so you can break them. All right, I'm going to duplicate these swirls just so I have them later if I need. And then I don't really need to keep my stencil on for now. What I'm focusing on here is focusing on the width of the swirls, the shapes of them, and then how they interact with everything around them. So I'll kind of show you what I mean. Focusing on my curves here. This is when I'm getting my curves really smooth. And eventually this will all be the same color. And so I'm not really worried about the fact that it looks different now. But for example, whenever it connects down here, I'm thinking it should have like some kind of a, feels like it's growing out of the bottom. Remember, though, a lot of what we're being inspired by is things that feel organic, and feel natural. So see how that's interesting and kind of unique. And I may thicken that up as well. I'll do the same thing up here. And a little bit of imperfection when it is coming from the brush, as far as like the lines aren't perfect. What I don't want is that the curves are not perfect. There's a big distinction there for me, is I'm okay if the line itself has a little bit of built-in imperfection because of the brush, but I still want the curves to be really, really clean. And there's a difference between the two. I hope that makes sense. Also, if you are watching and you have any questions or anything comes up, feel free to drop it in the chat, and I can try to address those things or explain things if I sometimes move kind of fast. So if I glossed over anything that you would love a little bit more explanation of, just let me know. Another thing that's important about when things are organic, if you're looking at a tree, when a tree is created, the problem when people try to draw trees is that they'll draw like a branch like this and like this. And it feels awkward because essentially what's happening is everything should taper as it goes. It should get thinner. And so, like for example, there could be a branch here, but then every following branch gets a little bit thinner, and the following branches get thinner and thinner. So basically, what we're wanting to do is kind of mirror that. I'm not going to stay so stuck with that, but in general, um, like if this is kind of thick right here, then I would want it to sort of taper. And the fun is I'll bring it to where it gets thick again in a different spot, but that will help it feel or kind of resonate with that idea of it being really organic, is that it will not get thicker before it slims down, and then it'll maybe beef up in a minute. I don't know if that makes sense. But point is, we're mirroring nature. That's the goal. I'll also certainly be working on this for a little while. So, um, again, if you have any questions or anything, just let me know. And I might not talk a ton because I'm just going to focus on getting these exactly right. But I might pop in and say a few things here and there. I am going to, again, make this brighter because I'm having a hard time seeing. There we go. helps so much. The reason is I just want to make sure my where I overlap with my letter is that that's really smooth and really clean, and I'm not compromising that area. Here's a spot where we're going to get thick again. And then we'll thin back out. And I want this to feel really gradual and smooth. Another super important thing that I've learned, which I'll share with you now, is that when it comes to, this is a big deal whenever you have things that have like varying thickness like this, is the inside line. This obviously is just an example. You need to be able to pull that line out and it's perfectly smooth and works. And the outside line, you need to be able to, like, if you pull that out somewhere else, it still needs to be perfectly smooth and it works well. So that's the thing we're looking for, is we can't compromise inside and outside. Both have to look really clean and be really smooth. And that's what really sells on it looking nice. And I don't want my taper to feel too sudden. I want it to feel gradual. And it's really gradual is the word, but also natural, because that's ultimately what we're going for. Remember, we're being inspired by nature here. Sorry if I'm making you dizzy spinning my screen so much. It's also always easier to draw on the inside of the curve. That's a really good trick whenever you're drawing curves. That probably would come in handy to some of you. Let's see. I'm not doing it right now, but whenever you can't always, but whenever you can, drawing from the inside of the curve is the best move, meaning my hand is right here and I'm drawing from my hand so that, well, this is if you're right-handed, I guess. If you're left-handed, it'd be different. But now I can hold my hand on the screen, have a lot of control over my pen, but also really pay attention to the swirl and to the curve itself. Okay, that looks good. All right, here's where we're gonna introduce one of our first accents, which I'm excited about. So there's a lot of ways to do this. I could do it to where it's just a flat junction like that. That can be cool. I could also do something like this. That's kind of interesting and sharp. There are some other ones that are nice and dramatic. I'm kind of following the curves one way or another. Could be something like that, which that does not look very good. It'd be more like this. Which I don't really know what I will do. I'm just kind of playing around. I like the sharp one though. It gives me an opportunity to fill in some of this space. And what I'm doing is I'm completing this curve and starting that curve, which is helpful. Cool. And I think what I'll probably do is we'll probably get thicker here. Not too thick. It's got to be natural. Okay, important piece here. I need to make sure that were it isolated, this curve makes sense. And I need to make sure this curve makes sense. So when it comes to my thicknesses, that's what I'm paying attention to make sure that both of them feel correct. Again, may not make a ton of sense to you, but you can definitely, if you start to look and pay attention, you'll notice it when it's wrong. All right, so here I'm coming to the first end of one of my curves. And so because and really I can do anything, break the rules, go for it. But because I have already established this sharp kind of thing happening down at the bottom, I'm probably going to use something similar up here. Cool. I like that. This is honestly not what I expected this to look like. Another thing I'm actually going to do is, remember I talked about you want to have the idea of the curves continuing naturally? I'm probably going to do this. To where it feels like this curve is continuing into the base. What we can do later is I could also go back and I could cut out pieces of this if I want, or we can make it more interesting. But for now, that'll help sell the idea. Remember how it feels natural. Like it starts thickest and it gets thinner from there. Very cool. As you can see, this could take a long time. So I'm honestly not sure. I was planning to finish this today in the video, but I may end up getting to a certain point and then pausing and either picking up next week or finishing on my own and showing you the finished product, because there's just so many things for us to learn. Don't know that we need to spend two live streams just on flourishes. Though honestly, I really am barely scratching the surface. But I don't know that's what the people would like to see. You can let me know. I guess I'm thinking when it comes to just learning about lettering, you don't need to spend a ton of time on flourishes. Though, if you're doing a teaching or training all about flourishes, you could really do a lot because there's so much. Mainly because there's so much inspiration and so much history. You can go back if you just search Baroque, Baroque, like Baroque architecture or Baroque design. Man, you'll find some crazy stuff. Baroque. Sorry, am I lying? I'm probably thinking of Rococo, but my art history professor somewhere is probably uh, shaking his head. I think Baroque would work as well. Baroque flourishes. Someone can fact check me on that. Definitely Rococo. That's like the really ornate, wild French style where you see like thinking of things like the Palace of Versailles that are just like outstandingly detailed and ornate and beautiful, that kind of stuff. interesting. Yeah, I'll stick with it for now. I'm so picky too, you guys. Like I really could go back and forth and like want to change the style of flourishes we're using like 10 times. Again, the perfectionist thing. But at some level, you just got to say, hey, maybe this isn't exactly the best thing you could do, or absolutely perfect, I guess would be a better way of saying it. But it's good, and you enjoyed it for what it's worth. I think sometimes it's just like sometimes you have the fear of presenting your work to anyone or showing anyone because you want it to be perfect. But that's kind of a trap and a pitfall, I find. I think that that really keeps us from learning because how do you learn? How do you become perfect if you never learn? And you're never going to learn unless somebody else can give you some advice and say, hey, this looks awkward, or you should change this, or have you thought about trying this? So I'm not going to worry too hard about it being absolutely perfect. But I just want to give you the idea of how flourishes can work when it comes to letters. So what I might do, I might try to finish this side of our flourishes, and then I might show you how I'll interact them, or how they'll interact with our letter form, and that may be where we end today. Because ultimately that's going to be really important. I'm seeing some things I need to change. So because this is thick right here, and it gets thin, it feels like because we have so much space to work with, this should be thicker, and then this should be thinner right there, and then maybe a little thickness. And these are maybe things you did not notice and wouldn't notice, but yeah, I think that's going to make more sense. Maybe not that thick, but I'm just going to, again, working additively and retractively, or my brain is a mess right now. I can't tell if that's the right words. I don't think it is. One thing I'm noticing, this feels super, super thick, so I'm going to want to bring it in. That feels a bit funny to me. And maybe I took away from the wrong side. That's kind of what I'm thinking. Yeah. Yep. I think that looks better. Yep. I think that's a lot more interesting. Yep. Liking that. Okay. Now we've got our other side. So yeah, I'll probably end up finishing. I'll do the same thing up here as I did down there. I might get a second win, but for now I'm thinking that I'll probably finish that one side for us, and then we'll look at how it will interact with our letter forms, and then I'll finish up the rest on my own and post it on my Instagram or something. Also, if you're watching, just want to set a reminder in case you haven't already, please like and subscribe this video. So like to the video, subscribe to the channel, and comment below. I really would genuinely like to know what you learned. Like what, I mean, I'm saying a lot of things, and chances are not everyone is going to stick around for all of it. So I'm curious, like, what are you taking away from the video? Like, what's sticking out to you? Okay. So for this guy, again, we're going thick. I can't go any thicker than this. So I want to make sure I'm not exceeding that because that will look wrong. Remember thinking about nature. And again, because so similar up here where we have this long curl, that was why I wanted that to feel thick. Same thing I've got right here. Got this long shape. So I'm probably going to want the thick part to live over there as well. So I need to keep that in mind. I don't want to go too thick over here. I need to taper it back down at some point so that we can emphasize this portion. What's nice about this is once you get to this point where you're just doing the flourishes, like it becomes pretty relaxing. Like you're definitely thinking still, but there's something about focusing in on the curves, like this relatively, like you're focusing on a small part at a time. Quite relaxing. Like my only care in the world right now is just making sure this curve looks nice and smooth. Thanks, Sojib Khan. I hope I pronounced your name right. I'm sorry if I didn't, and I don't know if you just commented that, but thanks. I'm glad that you like my work. Let's see. Another thing that's really important that I haven't really talked about is keeping a consistency with our thinnest points. Um, will help unify everything. So whenever it comes to like this is pretty thin, that's pretty thin, that's thin, this is going to be thin. Like we want all of these to feel like they're relatively the same thickness. Um, if some are really thin and some are really thick, it starts to ruin our illusion and make things feel not cohesive or incohesive. Is that a word? I don't know. So that's a general, that also is very much applies to letter forms. Very, very, very much. Is look for your thicks and thins and be sure that they're consistent. Otherwise, you're going to have something that feels like it's two different things meshed together as opposed to one cohesive thing. So remember again, I'm completing my line, this curve. Oops. Completing the curve up until the end of this point. And I'm starting a new one right here. Yeah, at some point I'll have to stop because I am quite hungry and it's almost lunchtime. Again, when it comes to rules, I'm wondering if I'm lying to you here. No, with the way I'm doing these flourishes, the inside curve when it ends is always the longer piece or the piece that's more pointed. This is a little different, but the inside piece is the one where it's got the sharp point. Same up here. This will be inside because, like if the swirl were to continue this way, that's the inside. So you see the insides have the points. And here it actually does work the same, the inside curve. But you could kind of argue that that's also the inside curve. So the junctions don't really follow the same rules. Okay, guys, we're getting close. Also, I haven't mentioned this, but I hope that you would choose to follow along with this video and create your own, because really the by far the best way to learn this stuff is to do it. Like watching it may be entertaining, and I guess if entertainment is your goal with this, then that's fine. But I hope that you would learn how to do this. You know, that it wouldn't just be. And then, you know, some of you are like my family and friends who are like, I don't care about doing it. I'm just just watching you, and that's fine. But you know, if you are trying to learn, really the only way to make that really happen is to do. I also think it's one of those things where as I've gotten older, you see how, you know, I'm not a dad yet, but you see how parents want their kids to avoid making the same mistakes that they did. Like that seems to be a common theme with parenting, is like, and maybe that's regret. I don't really know where that comes from. It probably is, but I think it's a good place, you know, if you, I don't know. I don't have a good example, but as a parent, you don't want your kids to experience what you did, or even like as a mentor or a big brother, you know, any kind of older figure, you want to protect those that come behind you from experiencing the same things that you did. But I've seen often that people really have to learn that for themselves. Like it seems like if that were the case, like if the older generation could stop the younger generation from making the same mistakes, and the world would be like, it'd only take a few generations for hopefully the world to be evened out. But I don't think that when you look at the world you could say that we've like totally arrived. So I think it's interesting. It's the same thing with graphic design though, and you know, really with any skill, is that like I want you to learn how to do this. Like I don't want you to have to just fumble through it and figure it out like I did when I was first learning. But ultimately, you kind of have to. Like I, it's not really right for me to protect you from the experience of learning. And I'm not saying the same thing with parenting exactly, but I'm just making the analogy that, you know, you learn by doing much more than by someone telling you. A kid does not know. They may take you for at your word that an iron is hot for a little while, but eventually they need to figure out for themselves. Not that you should make them, but they will figure out for themselves. So, anyway, rambling, probably because I'm hungry. But yeah, if you are wanting to learn, then you should be following along and doing this yourself. Hopefully, you tried creating a different letter form like we talked about in the other video, just because that'd be pretty interesting if we could see like a bunch of different ones that you guys have done that are all different. I also do want to say this is pretty important too, is that you can't judge your beginning with someone else's like middle of the journey kind of thing. I've been doing lettering for like 7 years, I think, or some amount of time. And while there have been times when I've done it a lot more or a lot less, there are a lot of things I've learned when it comes to like the rules, and even with like things that are purely muscle memory, of like my muscles in my arm are able to hold my pencil smooth for a little while whenever I'm drawing curves, because I've just done it a ton, that you may not have when you start. And so I just want to make you aware, like if you're just beginning, then you'll probably finish, if you're doing following along with me, you'll probably finish and be like, man, it doesn't look as good as his, or it doesn't look as this or that. But like, duh, that's the point. Like if you could be perfect at something the moment you pick it up, there's not really much point to anything. It's all about learning and experiencing and trying for yourself. But just want to say, don't be hard on yourself if it doesn't look perfect yet. Um, what I say is, learn from your mistakes, or learn from the things that you would want to do differently, and try it again and give it another shot. And you'll find that that's a really solid way to improve. But I think for me, here I am trying to have you avoid the mistakes that I experienced. Literally, what I was just talking about. Whenever I started off, I just compared so much. Like, it's really funny. Um, I would post on Instagram all the time. Like, my afternoons, my evenings, all my free time was spent creating lettering for Instagram, which, teach his own. But I found that it was just becoming pretty exhausting for me. So eventually I was just like, hey, I can't really sustain this anymore. So I took a pretty big break. This is probably 5 or 6 years ago, and didn't really post a ton. Didn't really try to keep up my following or whatever. And it's funny because whenever I was doing stuff, there'd be people that I would totally judge, like, just being honest, um, which is super lame, but that's just where my head goes because I'm pretty competitive. And I'd be like, wow, like, my stuff's so much cooler than theirs. Or like, wow, they're like really just getting started, I guess. Like, they're putting that work out there. You know, it's pretty lame thoughts to say out loud, and I've tried to get better about that, but that's just being honest. But it's funny because I came back after a few years, and the people that I had, silently judged were incredible, because they just kept at it. They didn't let their starting point um, detract from where they were going to go. And if I had had my way, if could have heard the rude things that I was thinking, just being real, like, they may have given up, because they hadn't arrived. But um, because they didn't stop, then eventually they did. So my point in all that is don't compare your work to mine, or really to anyone else's. Allow people to be a place of inspiration for you and challenge you. Like, there are things I see, especially when it comes to illustration or really unique lettering styles, where I'm like, wow, like, that's crazy. I want to try something like that. Or I want to just come up with something that feels so groundbreaking like that does. But I have to avoid letting it crush me, or letting me feel like my work is not enough or isn't worthwhile when it is. So there you go. See if you can learn from my lesson. Maybe I'll disprove my theory that we all have to learn for ourselves. Okay, so I've done my bottom one and I've isolated it in its own group. I'm going to turn my opacity down a good bit, and then I'm going to add a mask because I want to be able to see where my shapes are supposed to break here. I believe this is one. Goes behind that R. That goes on top. This goes behind. And with the mask, this is pretty important. I don't know if I can show you this in Procreate so easily. So what we're seeing with our mask here, is that how do I explain this? This is an important tool for like Photoshop or other things when it comes to masking, is that anything that is white in that little area right there, I can't zoom in on it, but where it says layer mask, anything that's white is going to allow what's underneath it, this layer, to come through. But anything that's black is going to hide it up. It's almost like using whiteout, you could kind of say, which maybe that's confusing, but anyway, so what I'm doing is I'm hiding the parts that I don't want to see by coloring them black within that little mask area. I'm actually not going to worry about the parts where they overlap yet, because I'm going to show you in a minute how we're going to handle that. Also, it's funny, I can talk a lot, but when you sit at a computer and you just talk to the air for like an hour, man, your voice gets pretty hoarse. Okay, I think I have roughly how that's supposed to look. I'm going to make a few refinements. Okay, I'd say this is looking pretty good. So we're almost done, at least with this portion. Here's what I'm going to show you. Here's our problem, though. Is if we were to make this color the same color as our shape right now, you obviously can't tell what's happening. Like, I've totally lost how cool it is that things are overlapping. So what I need to do is I need to make sure that it stands out from what's underneath it. And I'll show you how we're going to do that. So one way I like to do something like this is to use subtle, it's kind of like shadows. So you can imagine, let's say, I'm going to do a new layer here. And we'll color this white. So let's imagine that this line right here, you can't really see so well. Imagine that line is casting a shadow downward. But instead of a shadow, it's going to be just a white area. So what I'll do in this new layer underneath, I'm going to color this white. Okay, so I'm going to do this for a few different strokes, and then I'll show you what our result is. And I'm trying to keep consistent the amount of white that is showing. And I like to do this instead of doing it on both sides, which I definitely could, which is really how it is in our example here. Now you can see how on the top and on the bottom, like on either side of these breaks, it cuts through, which that's totally fine. You definitely could do that. I find it makes things look a little more cartoony than I'm wanting, so I'm not going to do that for this. What I'm thinking is like, like I said, shadow, and I want to think like the bottom of my flourishes. And again, it's not going to be perfect, but the thing is I just don't want to do it on both sides. So for this, I'm just going to cut straight through, or maybe I'll cut part of it, and then I'll kind of fade it in. That could be an option. If it really were a shadow, that's kind of how it would work. And I'm just going to go ahead and do this across all of my different ones. So when I change the color back, you'll see what's happening here. And there may be things about this that we don't like, and that's really fine. Could always change it up. So what I'm doing here is I'm making it to where it feels like this is all one solid line. What I'm saying is make it look like this, like this is all one line. Don't know if you're tracking with what I'm saying here. We're almost done. Is that it? Okay, I think roughly this should be what we're looking for. So now what I can do is if I take my flourishes and I change them back, now I've got this cool effect to where we can see them kind of cutting and breaking through. And honestly, maybe we don't stick with this. Maybe we do something different. And this is where, you can play around and see how we want to handle this. I didn't have a plan for this coming in. I'm just kind of experimenting. Maybe instead of doing a true shadow, I just do like one whole side gets cut. Or another option is I could do it at different points. Like this actually would make sense for a shadow. I do like that. I do like that a lot. For here it would be and again, let's break the rules if we got to make sure that we can appreciate what's happening. The one thing we also need to do that's important. Yes, I think that will help a lot. Oh, look here, I missed. Oh, no, that one's going underneath. And I can't see what I'm working with here, so. So what's happening here is we have these implied pieces. Like you can't really tell what it is, but it's implying that there are these cut throughs that are happening, which is interesting. I'm not sure that I love it. Like we may just go back and totally change it, and make it to where instead things are just outlined like in our example. But we also might just keep it as it is. Again, this is the fun part of it. We're really experimenting, seeing what we like, don't like that. So one thing that's going to help us here, because there are some parts where it's like, this feels a bit confusing. Where's my green? Like this feels a bit confusing because it's like, why isn't this cutting through here like you would expect? So what we need to do is we need to separate these guys and make it clear that that's a break and that the R is on top there. So this new layer, I'm using more white. What's funny is I bet if I go back through this live stream and watch, you'll see my posture slowly degrade as I'm getting a little tired. And again, maybe what I do is just the bottom side is where it cuts. That goes on top, this goes underneath. I guess for that, they both need to be. Like I said, I'm really making this up as I go, so it's possible we won't like any of this. But these ones that are purely vertical, it feels like I do have to do something to make it clear what's happening here. That's where I could also do this. And you know, that really is interesting. Like there are some cool things happening. I'm not sure that I love it. I may end up going back and changing it, but I think you can see some of the benefits here. We could add like some accent cutout shape into our little stem guy here. So yeah, okay, so we're gonna pause here. I really like what we have so far. I think that there are things that I don't love, but that's kind of how this goes, you know. So what I'll do is I'm gonna call it quits here today, guys. Thanks for tuning in. Like I said before, if you haven't, feel free to like this video, comment, and subscribe. It would mean a lot to me, just to let me know if you're enjoying this. And then next time I see you, so in 2 weeks, I will have this finished one way or another, and we'll talk for a minute about the final product. But that's really all I got, and super thankful. And yeah, hope you guys have a great day. Going back to our encouragement all the way at the beginning, if you've made your way through all of this, would be that I hope that you are able to encourage someone today. And don't worry about the numbers, don't worry about what people think, but make it your goal to encourage someone. That's it. Again, I'll see you.